I think what Jesus is saying here is you are revealing your pride and superior feelings about yourself by only inviting people who you think are important, people who you know have the means to invite you to their place later.
Welcome to the Parable Podcast. Thanks for joining Family Life on-air host Randy Snavely as he digs into the story lessons taught by the world's greatest teacher, Jesus. In this episode, it's part 2 of The Best Seat in the House, taken from chapter 14 of the Gospel of Luke.
Jesus tells the parable in Luke 14, beginning at verse 8. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this man your seat." Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Then Jesus said to his host, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers, or your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Now, clearly, Jesus is not talking about seating charts at this wedding feast. Alan Smith says the point of the parable is if you force yourself into a position of honor, you will eventually find yourself humbled. But if you willingly take the last seat, you will be exalted. John MacArthur says the parable is an indictment to the Pharisees' pride, and it's an invitation to the kingdom of God. If you look ahead to verse 15, you'll see that one of the guests has kind of figured that out, because he says, "Blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God." Jesus tells this parable to point out if you want to get in good with the host of heaven, don't elevate yourself like the Pharisee did in Luke chapter 18. Remember his prayer? "I thank thee that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I tithe," and so on and on and on. You know what he's doing? He's trying to get the best seat in the house. He wants the most prominent position. Sadly, he will get nowhere near the Lord. Over and over, the message the Lord gives is to be humble. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Dave Thomas, who was really the driving force behind Kentucky Fried Chicken before they kind of shafted him, founded Wendy's restaurant, and in his book, Well Done, The Common Guy's Guide to Everyday Success, writes, "I got my MBA long before I got my GED. Dave never graduated from high school. He goes on to say, "I even have a photograph of me in my MBA graduation outfit, a snazzy knee-length work apron. I guarantee you that I'm the only founder among America's big companies whose picture in the corporate annual report shows him welding a mop and a plastic bucket." That wasn't a gag. It was a case of me leading by example. You see, at Wendy's, MBA does not mean a Master's of Business Administration. It means mop bucket attitude. We would all do well to have that kind of MBA. A single mom is struggling and worn out from working and trying to raise her kids. Want to get your spiritual MBA? Go volunteer to watch her kids every day. Go spend an afternoon with a lonely senior citizen. Park farther away from the door so someone else won't have as far to walk. Do some yard work for a neighbor who has a hard time doing it anymore. You don't really have to look very hard to see what needs mopping. And if you can't see anything, maybe you should be looking a little lower. Go low, and you'll end up high. You are listening to part 2 of Family Life's Parable Podcast, The Best Seat in the House, taken from Luke's Gospel, chapter 14, verses 1 through 14. In our parable, Jesus doesn't stop with the guys trying to get the best seat. He also nails the guy who set the whole feast up. He's not scrambling to get a prominent seat because he's the host. He already has a seat. But Jesus tells him in verse 12, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, or your rich neighbors, lest they invite you in return and you get paid back. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So Jesus really is talking about the kingdom. I think what Jesus is saying here is you are revealing your pride and superior feelings about yourself by only inviting people who you think are important, people who you know have the means to invite you to their place later. Well, enough with this separation mentality. Stop exploiting the hospitality. Get off the you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back thinking. Stop trying to elevate yourself in everybody else's eyes and do some mopping. Be humble and invite people who are hurting and needy. Now, Jesus isn't saying you have to do it that way all the time, but don't ignore those who will never be able to pay you back. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Sammy Morris came to the United States from Africa to attend college in Upland, Indiana at Taylor University. When he arrived at the school, the president asked him what room he wanted. Sammy simply replied, "If there is a room nobody else wants, give it to me." Later, the president told his fellow staff members, "I turned away with my eyes full of tears, and I asked myself if I was willing to take what nobody else wanted." James tells us God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. The way to the kingdom of God is not by grabbing the best seat in the house. It's by grabbing the last seat and letting God move you up. When we humble ourselves before Him as a wretched sinner, He picks us up. Charles Spurgeon said, "Every Christian has a choice between being humble or being humbled."
This has been the Parable Podcast with Randy Snavely. Click the subscribe button so you'll know when new episodes are released. And be sure to check out Family Life's other original podcasts, including If That Makes Sense, Business by the Book, and Rise Up with Steve, Therese, and Tim. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Your partnership makes podcasts like this possible. Find out more at familylife.org.